Karen had always considered herself the neighborhood sentinel. She was the first to notice when something was out of place, always ready to speak up and take action if she felt something was wrong. So, when her new neighbor, James, moved in across the street, it didn't take long for Karen to spot his truck with a large MAGA sticker plastered on the bumper. To her, the sticker was a glaring symbol of everything she found troubling. Why would anyone want to display such a divisive political message in a peaceful suburban setting? It felt to her like a direct challenge to her values. Though she tried to ignore it, every time she passed the truck, it served as a constant reminder of the political rifts tearing the country apart, and it began to frustrate her more with each passing day. Finally, Karen decided enough was enough. She could no longer allow that truck to sit in front of her house. She would call a tow truck and have it removed, no more pretending to be the accommodating neighbor. It was time for James to learn a lesson. What Karen didn't realize was that her actions would have consequences she couldn't have predicted. It was a Saturday morning when Karen made up her mind. She had walked past James's house countless times, growing increasingly agitated each time she saw the truck parked there. It was large, noisy, and that MAGA sticker felt like an affront to everything she stood for. She had already tried to go through the HOA, but they had told her the truck didn't violate any of their rules. That didn't matter to Karen. She was determined to make a stand. So she decided to take matters into her own hands and called a towing company, convinced that if she could just get the truck removed, everything would return to the way it was before. "I'll just say it's blocking the sidewalk," she muttered, figuring it was a minor enough infraction to justify the tow. It was parked just a little too close to the curb, enough for her to make a case. The towing company promised to send someone right away, and Karen felt a rush of excitement as she waited. She paced nervously around the house, her mind already imagining the truck being hauled away, its tires screeching as it was taken off her street. A few minutes later, Karen heard the low rumble of a tow truck approaching. She peeked through the blinds, watching as the driver expertly positioned his truck behind James's. The sound of the winch engaging sent a thrill through her body. It was happening. She stood by the window, barely able to contain her satisfaction, when the tow truck driver stopped. He turned, his eyes scanning the street. Then, in a move Karen didn't expect, the driver stepped out of the truck and walked up to her porch. "Ma'am, you called about the truck across the street?" he asked. "Yes, I did," Karen said, her voice firm. "It's been bothering me for weeks. It's right up against the sidewalk, and I've had enough of it. It's time for it to go." The driver hesitated. "Well, ma'am, I'm happy to help, but I need to make sure you've got all the right permissions for this. If I move this vehicle, I need to make sure it's legally justified." Karen blinked in surprise. "Of course it's justified. It's blocking the sidewalk. I'll need proof of that, ma'am," he said. "Can I get a picture of the violation?" Karen felt her stomach drop. She hadn't thought about the technicalities. "What do you mean?" she asked, confused. "The thing is, I can't just tow a vehicle on a whim without the proper documentation or verification. I can't just go by someone's word, even if it's yours." For a moment, Karen felt a surge of frustration. This was supposed to be easy, but now she had to do things the proper way? This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. The driver noticed the change in her demeanor and offered a simple suggestion. "If you want, we can wait until someone from the HOA or a local official can confirm, but I can't just move the truck without cause." "Fine," Karen said, her tone cold. "I'll deal with it myself." The driver simply nodded and walked back to his truck, leaving Karen standing there, realizing this wasn't going to be as straightforward as she thought. But she wasn't ready to back down. After all, she was right, wasn't she? Karen stood frozen on her porch, staring at the tow truck, now parked across the street, waiting for the driver to return. Her plans had hit a snag, but Karen wasn't the type of person to back down once she made up her mind. This was her neighborhood, and James's truck had become a personal affront to her sense of order. She knew what needed to be done, and no minor setback was going to stop her. Determined, Karen dialed her friend Sarah. They had known each other for years, and Karen often relied on her to affirm her decisions, even when they weren't necessarily popular. "Sarah, it's Karen. You won't believe this, Karen said when her friend picked up. What happened? Sarah's voice was light, as if she hadn't expected anything major. The tow truck driver won't move the truck. He wants some official confirmation about the sidewalk thing, but I'm not waiting around for that. This truck has been bothering me for weeks, and I can't just ignore it anymore, Karen explained, pacing back and forth. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Karen could almost hear Sarah's thoughtful sigh. Karen, I get that you're upset, but maybe you should reconsider. I mean, James isn't exactly a bad guy. He keeps to himself. Is this really worth it? Of course it is. The man is practically advertising his political views right in front of my house. It's not just a truck, Sarah. It's a statement, a big, ugly, loud one. And if no one else is going to do anything, then I will. Sarah's voice softened. I just don't want you to make an enemy out of someone who might be, harmless. People can be more than their trucks or their stickers, Karen. But Karen wasn't listening. The words, MAGA truck, kept echoing in her mind, each repetition sharpening her anger. Her heart raced as she glanced once again at James's house. The truck stood there, silent and unmoving, taunting her with its very presence. I'll deal with it myself, Karen muttered before hanging up. An hour later, Karen received a call. It wasn't from the towing company, but from James himself. Karen, his voice was calm but unmistakably stern. I know you had my truck towed. I want to talk. Karen's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected James to reach out directly, but she wasn't backing down now. She had made her move, and it was too late to backpedal. Why did you do it? James asked, the words surprisingly gentle. What made you think that was the right thing to do? I did it because that truck represents everything that's wrong with people like you, Karen snapped. It's divisive. It's hateful. And I don't want it in my neighborhood anymore. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, making Karen feel uneasy. She half expected James to start shouting or accusing her of something, but instead, his voice was measured, almost pitying. You really don't understand, do you? Understand what? Karen's heart beat faster, confused by the change in his tone. James sighed. You think that truck represents who I am, don't you? But that's not true. It's just a truck, Karen. It doesn't define me, and I thought you of all people would understand that better than anyone. Karen's confusion deepened. What are you talking about? All I see when I look at that truck is a man proudly displaying his political beliefs. Beliefs I don't agree with, mind you. Yeah, well, that's the problem, isn't it? You're so caught up in what you think you know about me that you've missed the bigger picture. James's voice grew harder, but there was still a strange calmness to it. You've just made an enemy out of someone you didn't understand, someone who would have helped you if you ever bothered to get to know him. Karen's stomach sank. There was something about the way James spoke that made her question her own decisions. I don't need any help from you, James. I just want my neighborhood to stay peaceful, she said, though her words now felt hollow. Maybe this neighborhood isn't as peaceful as you think, Karen, and it's not just because of my truck, he replied quietly before hanging up. The call left Karen feeling unsettled. She stared at her phone, her thoughts a whirlwind. James hadn't shouted. He hadn't even raised his voice. But there was something in his tone, a weight to his words, that left Karen questioning whether she had made a huge mistake. Her thoughts were interrupted when she noticed Mark, James's brother, walking up the street toward her house. Mark was a tall man, always quiet but observant. He and James weren't close, but Mark had always been friendly enough when they crossed paths. Without a word, Mark approached Karen's porch, his expression unreadable. Can we talk? He asked simply. Karen nodded, though she wasn't sure where this was going. I heard about what you did to James's truck, Mark began, his voice low but firm. And I'm here to let you know that this wasn't just about a truck for him. It was never about the truck. Mark paused, letting that sink in. You see, James didn't just put that sticker on his truck because of politics. It's not about supporting one party over another. It's about his past, his work, what he's been through. Karen blinked, her irritation now replaced with confusion. What does that mean? What are you talking about? Mark met her gaze, his eyes steady and unwavering. James was a cop, for years. But not just any cop. He worked undercover. He's seen and done things you wouldn't even believe. He put his life on the line every single day. And that truck? It's a symbol to him, a reminder of the people he's lost, the things he's had to sacrifice. Karen felt her breath catch in her throat. She had no idea. None of it had ever crossed her mind. Mark's voice softened. Before you make any more decisions, you should really get to know the people around you. Sometimes things aren't as simple as they seem. And with that, Mark turned and walked away, leaving Karen standing on her porch, speechless and filled with regret. Karen stood frozen on her porch, Mark's words ringing in her ears. The cool breeze swept through the trees in the yard, but she felt no relief. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest, and for the first time in a long while, Karen questioned her actions. She had acted quickly, thoughtlessly, with the belief that she was standing up for what was right. But now, everything felt clouded, shrouded in a veil of regret. Mark had dropped a bombshell. James, her neighbor, the man with the truck she had loathed for so long, had been through things she couldn't even begin to understand. An undercover cop? Karen hadn't seen that coming. She had always assumed James was just another guy with an opinion she didn't share, someone to be written off and ignored. But Mark's words changed everything. What if she had gotten it wrong? What if all her assumptions about James and his truck had been based on nothing more than prejudice? Her phone buzzed, shaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. I saw James and Mark talking outside. What happened? Are you okay? Karen stared at the text for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. Sarah had been her sounding board throughout this whole ordeal, but Karen knew she couldn't simply explain away what had just happened. She had gone too far, and now there were consequences. But what were those consequences? What did she owe James after everything? Instead of responding to Sarah, Karen decided to take a walk. She needed time to clear her head, to sort through the emotions swirling inside her. Her feet led her to the end of the block, her mind racing. What had driven her to do it, to act so rashly without considering the bigger picture? Had she been so blinded by her own beliefs that she couldn't see beyond them? As she walked, Karen passed by other houses in the neighborhood, the ones she had never paid much attention to. The gardens were neatly kept, the lawns well trimmed. She noticed how peaceful everything looked, almost too peaceful, and a sick feeling rose in her stomach. Was that what she wanted? A quiet life where nothing ever challenged her, where she could surround herself with people who thought exactly the same way she did? Suddenly, Karen heard footsteps behind her, and she turned around, startled. There was James, walking toward her at a calm pace. He hadn't seen her yet, and for a moment, Karen felt an irrational wave of fear. She quickly wiped away the thoughts of guilt that had surfaced. He had every right to be angry with her. James spotted her and stopped in his tracks. He wasn't angry. At least, he didn't seem it. Instead, his face wore an expression of quiet understanding. "Can we talk?" he asked. Karen didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected to run into him like this, alone, without the walls of her house between them. She had imagined this moment, but now that it was happening, it didn't feel like she thought it would. There was no shouting, no accusations, just a man waiting for her to respond. "Of course," Karen finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "I owe you that much." They both walked a little further down the sidewalk, the silence between them awkward but not uncomfortable. When they reached the park at the end of the block, they stopped and sat on one of the benches, the sound of birds chirping in the distance. James was the first to speak. "You know, I wasn't going to confront you about the truck at first. I thought maybe I'd just let it go. But something about the way you acted really got under my skin." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but James raised his hand, signaling her to wait. "I get it. I do," he continued. "You don't like the truck. You don't like what it stands for. I understand that." He paused, as though choosing his words carefully. "But what I don't understand is why you didn't try to talk to me about it first. Why didn't you just ask?" Karen's heart skipped a beat. She had no response. She hadn't thought to talk to him. She had only seen the truck and immediately assumed the worst. Her judgment had been quick, harsh, and unfair. It had never occurred to her that James might have a reason for everything he did. "I should have come to you first," Karen said, her voice low. "I acted without thinking. I just saw that truck and thought, I thought I knew what it meant. And I didn't. James nodded, but his expression softened. I know it's not easy to look past our differences, Karen. Believe me, I get it. But this whole thing, this isn't the way to fix anything. You don't just make decisions for people, especially not people you don't understand. Karen felt a pang in her chest. How could she have been so narrow-minded? She had let her feelings take control, and now as she sat here facing James, it all seemed so clear. She had assumed so much, and in doing so, had hurt someone who hadn't deserved it. She had become exactly the thing she despised, a person who judged others based on appearances and assumptions. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm really sorry, James. I never should have done that. I was wrong. James didn't immediately respond. He just stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he sighed, a quiet sound of resignation. You don't have to apologize, you just have to remember that we're all more than what we put on the outside, he said gently. And sometimes we have to stop and listen before we act. Karen nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time in a long time, she felt something stir inside her. A real, sincere desire to make things right. She had learned a hard lesson today, but she was determined not to let it go to waste. I won't make this mistake again, Karen said, the sincerity clear in her voice. James offered a small smile, his eyes warm. I believe you. And maybe next time we can have a real conversation. About the truck. About everything. Karen smiled back, a flicker of hope igniting inside her. Maybe this could be the beginning of a new chapter. One where understanding and respect mattered more than assumptions and prejudices. The days following the conversation with James passed quietly, but the impact of their exchange lingered in Karen's mind. Every time she passed by his truck, parked in its usual spot, she was reminded of the lesson she had learned. Not just about James, but about herself. The old, well-worn truck no longer felt like a symbol of defiance or division. Now to Karen, it represented something else. Growth. A step forward, even if that step was uncomfortable. But as much as she tried to move on, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. What had it really cost her to act the way she did? And why had she let herself be so quick to judge someone without understanding their story? It was a week after their conversation when Karen's curiosity finally got the best of her. She had been meaning to reach out to James again, to continue the dialogue, but something had been holding her back. Part of her was afraid of reopening the wounds she had created, while another part was afraid of how things might go. What if he didn't want to talk anymore? What if he thought she was just apologizing for the sake of it? But today something felt different. Maybe it was the quiet urgency in her heart, the nagging reminder that she needed to make things right, not just with James, but within herself. That afternoon, Karen decided to go for a walk. As she approached James's house, she found herself hesitating. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't figured out what she was going to say. But before she could talk herself out of it, Karen rang his doorbell. The door swung open almost immediately. James stood there, looking surprised, but his face quickly softened when he saw who it was. Karen, he said, a hint of cautious curiosity in his voice. Everything okay? Yeah, Karen said, her voice slightly shaky. I just wanted to say, thank you for understanding me. And I'm sorry, I don't think I really grasped the full picture before. I jumped to conclusions and I just wanted to apologize. James stood still for a moment, his eyes studying her. Karen felt a wave of vulnerability wash over her, but she pushed through it. She had come this far. She had to see it through. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about the way I acted. It's just that I was so focused on my own beliefs, my own frustrations, that I didn't take a moment to stop and really see you for who you are. I just saw the truck, and I made it about everything I disagreed with. And that was wrong, Karen continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. James stepped aside, inviting her in. Come in, he said, let's talk. Karen entered cautiously, her nerves still frayed. They sat in the living room, and for a moment there was silence. James motioned toward a chair, and Karen sat down, feeling the weight of the conversation that loomed ahead. I guess it's just hard for people to understand what's behind that truck. James started, his tone reflective. It's more than just politics. It's a reminder of everything I've seen, everything I've been through. There's a lot of history there. A lot of pain. Karen nodded slowly, feeling her understanding deepening. I didn't know that. I never thought to ask. I assumed it was just about the sticker. But that's the thing, isn't it? We never ask. We never take the time to understand what's really going on. James leaned back in his chair, his face serious. I get that. It's easy to make assumptions when we don't understand someone's story. But that's where the harm happens. And it's not just about the truck. It's about everything. We see someone, we judge them, and then we act without knowing the full story. Karen bit her lip, feeling the sting of truth in his words. Had she been so quick to judge others without ever asking or considering what they were going through? But that's the thing with karma, isn't it? James said, his eyes meeting hers. You can't just go around doing things without thinking of the consequences. It doesn't matter how justified you feel at the moment. Eventually it comes back to you. Sometimes it hits harder than you expect. Karen felt a shiver run down her spine. She had thought about karma before, but she had never truly understood its weight. Until now. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Well, James began, his gaze intense. I'm not sure how much you know about what happened to me before I moved here. But in short, I wasn't always a good person. I made a lot of mistakes. And not just mistakes. I hurt people. I hurt my family. I hurt myself. The thing is, I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until everything fell apart. The truck? It's not just a symbol of my political views. It's a symbol of a second chance. A reminder that things can get better. James paused, allowing his words to sink in. Karen's mind raced as she processed what he had said. He wasn't just some guy with a MAGA sticker on his truck. He was a man who had been through hell and back. Someone who had fought to rebuild himself after the mistakes of his past. I don't know if I would have changed if it weren't for the things I went through, James continued. But one thing I've learned for sure is that karma doesn't let you off easy. You don't get to mess up and think there won't be a price to pay. It'll come for you, in one way or another. Karen stared at him, understanding finally dawning. This was the price. Her mistake, her rash judgment. It had been her karma for closing herself off to others, for assuming things based on surface-level impressions. The anger she had directed toward James, the anger she had felt toward his truck, was that the price she had to pay for her own prejudices? Maybe, just maybe it was. I think I get it now, Karen said quietly. It's not just about the truck. It's about seeing the whole person. And I see that now. I didn't before. James smiled, a small but genuine smile that softened the lines of his face. I'm glad. I'm really glad you understand. And just so you know, you're not the only one learning. I think we all need to learn a little more patience, a little more kindness. We're all just trying to make it through, after all. For the first time in a long while, Karen felt something shift inside her, something real. It was as if the world had expanded and her understanding had deepened. She wasn't just apologizing to James anymore. She was acknowledging the way she had seen the world and how she had let her assumptions shape her actions. And in that moment, Karen realized that karma wasn't just a consequence. It was a chance for change, a chance to become better, if only she was willing to face the truth. The weeks that followed, Karen and James's heartfelt conversation marked the beginning of a profound transformation in both their lives and the dynamics of the neighborhood. Karen found herself reflecting deeply on her actions and the assumptions she had made about James. The weight of her regret pushed her to seek redemption, not just with James, but within herself. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Karen decided to host a neighborhood barbecue. It was her way of bridging the gap she had unintentionally widened. She sent out invitations to all her neighbors, including James and his brother Mark. The thought of bringing everyone together made her nervous, but she knew it was a necessary step toward healing and understanding. As the day of the barbecue arrived, Karen busied herself with preparations. The aroma of grilled food filled the air, mingling with the laughter and chatter of neighbors reconnecting. When James and Mark arrived, Karen greeted them warmly, her previous apprehensions melting away in the spirit of reconciliation. Throughout the afternoon, conversations flowed easily. Stories were shared, barriers were broken down, and the community felt a renewed sense of unity. James spoke about his experiences as an undercover cop, offering insights that many had never considered. Karen listened intently, her respect for James growing with each revelation. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Karen and James found themselves sitting together, watching the children play in the yard. "You know, I never imagined things would turn out this way," Karen admitted, a genuine smile on her face. "I'm grateful for the chance to understand you better." James nodded, his expression soft. "And I'm glad you reached out. We all have our stories, our struggles. It's important to see beyond the surface." As night fell, the neighborhood glowed with a newfound camaraderie. Karen realized that her actions, though misguided, had led her to a path of personal growth and stronger community bonds. She had learned the value of empathy, the importance of communication, and the dangers of letting prejudice cloud her judgment. Karen's journey from judgment to understanding serves as a poignant reminder of the power of empathy and the importance of looking beyond first impressions. In a world often divided by differences, her story underscores the necessity of open dialogue and the willingness to embrace the complexities of those around us. As neighbors gathered under the stars that evening, sharing stories and laughter, it was clear that true community thrives not on uniformity, but on the rich tapestry of diverse experiences and perspectives. Karen and James's newfound friendship became a beacon of hope, illustrating that even the deepest divides can be bridged with patience, understanding, and a sincere desire to connect. In the end, Karen's decision to tow the truck was a catalyst for change, teaching her that every person carries a story worth hearing, and that redemption is always within reach when one chooses to listen and grow. The neighborhood, once marked by silent judgments, blossomed into a vibrant community where respect and kindness reigned supreme.